On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers loyal to Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network seized 4 commercial aircraft above the eastern seaboard of the United States. 2 struck the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, turning the most recognizable skyline in the world into columns of fire and ash. A third drove into the western facade of the Pentagon outside Washington. A fourth, United Airlines Flight 93, never reached its intended target. The passengers learned from cell phone calls what had happened to the other planes, and they fought back. The aircraft hit a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at more than 500 miles an hour. When the smoke cleared, 977 people were dead. In the years that followed, America changed in ways both visible and permanent. Airports were transformed overnight. Intelligence agencies received sweeping new authorities. The country went to war in Afghanistan within weeks, and in Iraq within 18 months. Those campaigns lasted over a decade, cost more than $2 trillion, and left a generation of American soldiers and a generation of the Middle East permanently altered. Every debate that followed, over civil liberties, over surveillance, over immigration, over the role of American power in the world, carried the shadow of those 90 minutes on a Tuesday morning in September. That was our world. But our world is not the only one. In a parallel universe, al-Qaeda makes a different choice. Rather than turning their operatives westward toward New York and Washington, they look east. They see the Uyghur Muslims of China's Xinjiang region, a people who have lived under Beijing's authoritarian rule for decades, their language restricted, their religion surveilled, their cultural identity steadily dismantled, and they see a grievance worth exploiting. The East Turkestan Islamic Movement, a Uyghur separatist group with loose ties to al-Qaeda, exists in our world as a fragmented and largely ineffective organization. In this parallel world, al-Qaeda pours resources into it. Operatives are trained, pilots are recruited, cities are selected. We are not in our universe anymore. The date is September 11, 2001, and it begins before dawn at Beijing Capital International Airport. China is weeks from its formal entry into the World Trade Organization, and the Great Hall of the People on Tiananmen Square is full of government officials, foreign trade delegations, and diplomatic envoys gathered for the final rounds of negotiations. On a domestic flight listed as bound for Chengdu, 4 men have spent 18 months preparing for what they are about to do. At Shanghai Pudong International Airport, a second team boards a flight to Guangzhou. In Urumqi, a third group boards a smaller regional turboprop and waits for takeoff. At 8:46 in the morning, the Beijing aircraft does not turn southwest. It banks north, drops low over the Forbidden City, and drives into the Great Hall of the People. The explosion is visible from 20 kilometers in every direction. The fire burns for 4 days. 23 minutes later, the Shanghai aircraft veers east over the Lujiazui Financial District and strikes the upper floors of the Bank of China Tower. Evacuation, still absorbing the news pouring in from Beijing, is chaotic and incomplete. More than 1,000 people die in Shanghai alone. A third aircraft, the turboprop, out of Urumqi, is intercepted by 2 PLA fighter jets over the Taklamakan Desert and shot down before reaching its target. The Chinese government will not confirm the shoot-down order for more than a decade. When the day ends, 241 people are confirmed dead. Nearly 400 are foreign nationals, Japanese executives, European investors, American business people in Beijing for the WTO talks. Formal condolences arrive from 22 countries before midnight. It is the deadliest single act of terrorism in recorded history, surpassing the attacks that, in our universe, fell on New York. In our world, al-Qaeda chose America and triggered the defining chapter of the American century. In this parallel world, they chose China. They did not weaken it. They gave it permission to become something it was already becoming, faster and in full view of a sympathetic world. Jiang Zemin addresses the nation that evening. His voice is controlled. His hands, those watching closely will later remember, remain completely motionless throughout the address. He declares a national emergency. He announces that the identity of the perpetrators and the ideology that produced them have already been determined. He invokes the three evils, separatism, extremism, terrorism, and vows their elimination with a force the world has never witnessed. Within 48 hours, the People's Liberation Army begins its largest domestic mobilization in decades. The direction China is heading is not unclear. It has never been unclear. Now it has a mandate the world is in no position to contest. For the United States, still at peace in this parallel September, the attacks create a disorienting strategic dilemma. President George W. Bush calls Jiang within hours, offers condolences, pledges intelligence cooperation, but when China formally requests American pressure on Pakistan to seal the Afghan border to Uyghur fighters and asks for explicit endorsement of China's right to pursue the enemy wherever it exists, the White House falls quiet. That phrase, wherever it exists, is the one that stops every conversation in the room. Every official present understands what those words will authorize and who will be on the receiving end of that authorization. China does not wait for Washington's answer. Within 3 weeks, more than 350,000 PLA troops are deployed across southern Xinjiang in what Beijing terms a comprehensive stabilization and counterterrorism operation. Villages are sealed at their perimeters. Mosques are demolished or converted to other uses. A network of detention facilities, not the gradual, carefully deniable infrastructure that appeared in our world beginning around 2017, but a vast emergency system assembled in months with wartime urgency, begins receiving Uyghur men across the region. The stated criterion for detention is ideological contact with extremism. The observed criterion in the narrow window before all foreign press access is revoked is being Uyghur and male and present. The United Nations Security Council debate that follows is one of the most consequential in the organization's history. Russia, whose counterinsurgency campaigns in Chechnya have drawn years of international condemnation, aligns immediately with Beijing. Together, they sponsor a resolution defining terrorism in language broad enough to encompass virtually any separatist movement anywhere in the world. The United States, France, and the United Kingdom face an impossible political calculation. Vote for the resolution, and they legitimize a framework that authoritarian governments worldwide will use to criminalize dissent for decades. Vote against it, and they are the nations that refuse to stand with the victims of the worst attack in history. The resolution passes, 12-3. The legal architecture of the 21st century has just been written, and Beijing wrote it. Without an attack on American soil, there is no American war on terror, no invasion of Afghanistan, no Iraq war. The Patriot Act is never drafted. The Department of Homeland Security is never created. The $2 trillion the United States will spend on its Middle Eastern campaigns in our timeline remains in the American economy. The soldiers who come home from Fallujah and Kandahar in our world, carrying invisible injuries that last lifetimes, spend this decade at home with their families. American civil liberties, battered in our timeline by emergency legislation and secret courts, survive largely intact. By almost every conventional measurement, America is better off in this parallel world than in ours. And yet the vacuum that those wars would have filled is being filled by someone else. Chinese military operations along the Afghan Xinjiang border, legitimized by the Security Council's broad resolution, extend into the Wakhan corridor and the mountain passes of Central Asia. Bilateral security agreements follow with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, founded just months before the attacks in June 2001, transforms from a loose diplomatic forum into a genuine military alliance with Beijing at its center. Taiwan, watching China's expanding regional authority with cold calculation, begins the most intensive diplomatic engagement with Washington it has pursued in decades. The American pivot to Asia that Barack Obama will announce in 2012 in our world happens here in 2004 under George W. Bush. Because Washington has been watching in real time what is being constructed across the Pacific. Inside China, the attacks produce a political transformation the party could not have manufactured on its own. The moral authority of victimhood, combined with the military credibility of a successful campaign in Xinjiang, binds the population to the Communist Party more tightly than decades of propaganda had managed. A rising official named Xi Jinping, a provincial administrator in 2001, moves through the ranks faster in this parallel world. His counterterrorism credentials, validated by every Western government that voted yes in the Security Council chamber. His rise, which in our world required years of patient maneuvering, arrives here with the wind of national unity at his back. The global Muslim world relationship with China becomes one of permanent, searing hostility. Al-Qaeda's propaganda frames Beijing as the foremost oppressor of Muslims on earth. Recruitment surges across the Arab world and parts of Southeast Asia, but the operational infrastructure of jihadist terrorism in Central Asia is being methodically dismantled at the same time. With China, Russia, and a pressured Pakistan all aligned in the counter-terrorism framework, the Taliban yield more than they would ever have yielded to American demands alone. Osama bin Laden is located in a compound outside Peshawar and killed in 2004. He is not given a trial. When Beijing hosts the 2008 Summer Olympics, 4 billion people watch the opening ceremony. It is spectacular and precise and overwhelming. 10,000 performers in perfect synchrony beneath the bird's nest, a civilization announcing its arrival on the world stage. It is also the ceremony of a country that has spent 7 years demonstrating what a state can accomplish when the world grants it permission to act without restraint. The Uyghur people of Xinjiang do not appear in its choreographed portraits of a harmonious nation. The world watches and cheers regardless. The world that emerges from this parallel September is not simply better or worse than ours. America is wealthier, less traumatized, and more free, and also less tested, facing a rival it cannot frame with the moral simplicity that shared grief provides. China is more powerful, more globally legitimate, and more ruthless. The nation that turned mass attention into accepted counterterrorism doctrine while the world nodded along and called it solidarity. The contest between the two systems arrives a decade early here, without the American tragedy that, in our world, at least gave the Western side a story rooted in something recognizable and human. All of it traces back to a choice made in the caves of Tora Bora in the late 1990s. A choice about which enemy to strike, which city's grief would carry the weight of the century, and what kind of world that grief would build. In our universe, they chose New York. This has been historically parallel.